Quick question before we start. Have you ever bought one book to fix your life, then three more for context, and suddenly your bank account is staging an intervention? Yeah, then you're in the right place. You're listening to the Spacious Brain podcast, where real neurodivergent humans with real jobs and real daily chaos overshare with pride. Minus the glossy, my ADHD is my superpower nonsense. Hi, I'm Noemi, a scientist, a neurodiversity coach. Yes, someone who will absolutely derail into a story from when I was 12 because I'm ADHD and tangents are my love language. If you ever felt alone or felt like the Temu version of neurodivergent because you're not an entrepreneur, not a CEO, and you forget to eat and drink on the same day, you're in the right place. Let's keep this real. In this episode, I'm joined by Petra. Petra is 56, a wife, dog mom, stepmom, ADHD coach, and someone who was diagnosed with ADHD in her early 50s after a lifetime of being told she was lazy, not trying hard enough, or somehow doing life slightly wrong. In this episode, Petra talks about what happened when the structure of work disappeared, and she suddenly had a house, a puppy, a degree, and a brain that refused to follow the neat little productivity spreadsheet everyone else seems to have been issued at birth. We talk about late diagnosis, adoption, trauma, school reports full of could do better if she concentrated, impulsivity, relationships, money, books, boundaries, ADHD coaching, and the strange grief of realizing you were never lazy. You were trying to run your brain with the wrong instruction manual. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, thanks for giving me this opportunity.
I'll start with the usual question, which is who is Petra?
Petra is 56. Had to think about that then. A wife, a dog mum, a stepmum. Diagnosed with ADHD at 52, if I remember rightly. I get confused. It was about, I think it was 2021 or 22. I can't remember. Yeah, and still learning a lot more about myself and my ADHD.
What brought you to seek a diagnosis like at 52? What if you can take us back at that time, what was happening that made you think that that was a possibility?
Yeah, my situation had changed quite a lot because I'd inherited some money. We were able to buy our own house. I gave up my job. My plan was to finish my degree in 2 years, or maybe even a year. Two modules to do, and I thought I've got 40 hours a week to spend on my degree. That's fine. So that was my plan. We had a new puppy, a new house. Obviously, things needed doing. I was doing my degree, and without that structure of being at work, everything just fell apart. And I think, especially the pressure of doing my degree, I ended up deferring one module the first year and then the second one. And I thought, the number of times, I mean, I was doing well in my degree, but the pressure I was putting myself under, the number of times I said to my husband, if only I could stop procrastinating and focus, imagine how much better I'd be doing. And then, I don't know, but I just gradually, I think my awareness of what ADHD is just started to increase. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, actually, there's something here. And I especially wanted a diagnosis to help support me while I was completing my degree. So I was lucky enough to be able to go private because the waiting list was 2 years or over 2 years, I think, at that stage. So it would have been after I'd finished my degree. And yeah, I got my diagnosis. Initially, they said predominantly inattentive, but since then I've noticed on my notes it's been changed to combination, which makes more sense because I'm very impulsive, quite fidgety. I can't sit still. So yeah, so definitely that makes sense. So
I'm with you on that. Like I can't sit still for the life of me, and I always have to have something that I fidget with. Like I remember when I was a child and I was in school, I was always playing with my hair. to the point
Mm.
that I was being told off by teacher because, you had to sit properly, and I was always playing around with my hair. And now I always at least have a pen in my hand so that I can.
Yeah, I used to when I was a kid, I used to chew my hair and bite off my split ends. So whether I can blame that on ADHD, I don't know. But yeah, it was a bit strange.
And before your diagnosis, you said a lot about your degree. Can I ask, what was your degree on?
It was an open degree, so I could choose the modules. I also managed to choose all modules that didn't have a final exam. They had an end of module assignment, which was still really hard. But I think because of the ADHD, my short-term memory is absolutely shocking. So the thought of having to do an exam absolutely scared me to death. So, but I did. It's like mental health modules, a psychology module. The last one was uh, it was almost like more a social care. And
Hmm.
funnily enough, I wanted to do the reason I chose that module was because there was the option the you could either do a final like research paper on something to do with the elderly or something to do with like adults. And now if I could do that, I'd have done one on ADHD and it would have been amazing. But at the time I was very interested in Alzheimer's because my adoptive mum had Alzheimer's. So I did it on there instead. So but yeah, there's definite big interest in like mental health, psychology, kind of that side of things. So, and funnily enough, one of the modules I did has been updated since then. And there's like a section on ADHD. And I just chuckled to myself because I thought I'd have been sat there reading that thinking, oh, and I'm sure lots of other people who've done that course have been thinking, yes, that
Yeah.
rings a bell. So yeah, I wonder how many people have got their diagnosis having done that section of the module.
When finally the lights goes on and you're like, ah, interesting.
Yeah, because I'm adopted as well, and I think I've always had issues, but I think I always put them down to being adopted. And then when I got my diagnosis, I thought, like, is it? I think there is an overlap, and I think they both impact. But having that knowledge has really helped. So I just need to remember to put those things in place that I know help me.
Yeah. And you described, like, before your diagnosis, the procrastination, the overwhelm, and, the thing that you told your husband, imagine if I would focus, how better everything would be. So, what did you tell yourself back then when you didn't know that it was ADHD?
I thought I was lazy. And that was the message that I always heard from being a kid that I was lazy. I didn't try hard enough. I compared myself to other people and that is something I've really tried to stop doing. But just, yeah, I didn't realize that part of the brain in someone with ADHD doesn't shut down when we try and focus on. Because I'd be reading the same paragraph and thinking, I've not taken any of this in, and thinking, well, I'm obviously not trying hard enough to concentrate. And all the time, all these other thoughts are going in my head. And I'm thinking, well, everyone deals with that. So they obviously just try harder to shut those distractions out. But neurotypical people don't deal with that. They can just switch from one part of the brain to the other and just do what they need to do.
And also, they might not have like the 20 tabs open that we might.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I remember because I had ADHD coaching myself, which was really helpful. And she said that one reason it's helpful to talk about things out loud, even if we're talking to ourselves, is because we're less likely to have other thoughts while we're talking out loud. But I still have another thought running through my head even while I'm talking. So talking about one thing, thinking about something else. So
Yeah. How were you as a child?
I was impulsive, reckless, broke my arm and dislocated my elbow when I was 9 doing a handstand off the swing. And I moved all the garden furniture, but obviously I didn't move the ground. So, yeah, I landed on one arm and just thought, oh, shouldn't have done that. I remember at junior school, and I went to like an all girls private school till I was 11. I remember stabbing a kid with a pencil. And I don't know what made me do this, locking the toilet doors and climbing under each door. So only one was unlocked. And all these things, they knew it was me. So, and I remember thinking at the time I was like a really quiet pupil and I never kind of would say boo to a goose. And then I went to a reunion like in my early 30s, and I remember someone saying, I remember you, you were always sat outside the headmistress's office. And I thought, yeah, I was. I was always in trouble. So, but still really shy. I didn't have many friends at school, at junior school or secondary school. I struggled with focus then. All my school reports, even, I don't know, even from the age of 5, said that, I didn't, if I could just concentrate, I'd do so much better. Yeah, I remember not so much, I remember reading through my reports with a friend here because it kind of felt a bit safer. And then I remember, and that was okay, although it was like, I really hope things have changed. But then reading one of my exercise books from when I was 8, and the cruelty of the teacher, like so judgmental, and it upsets me. I mean, I'm 56 now, so I was at school in, from the mid 70s onwards. So even though there was awareness of ADHD, even though it wasn't called that, you know, they didn't think girls had it. So it would have been completely under the radar. But the frustration that nobody thought that anything was wrong and that it's just she's lazy, she doesn't work hard enough. And the frustration was because I wasn't getting stuff done in school, my parents were insisting on me doing more at home to kind of make up for it. So I think in a way, everything they did was kind of the opposite of what would have worked. So, if I'd been kind of encouraged and praised for what I did do right, that would have been so much better than being criticized for what I was doing wrong, kind of pushed to do more. And I still struggle even now with that. When I'm having kind of downtime, there's a voice in my head saying, you don't do enough, you should be doing more. Even when I don't know what I should be doing, but you're not doing enough. So it's hard.
It's super hard, and it's there are two things that come to mind. One is that this is recurrent with most of my clients that I had. Like that, the first thing that I hear is that guilt, that shame that is still with like many of us. The fact that I should do more. I'm not productive enough. I'm not doing enough. And that's because we probably spent so many years hearing that it's embedded
Mm,
within the way we think. And it's really hard to move away from it and to try and understand that even if logically now with the diagnosis, that it's how your brain works. You weren't lazy. It was just you were navigating like a life where that was designed for neurotypical brains. It wasn't designed for you. Moving away from that shame and that guilt, it's something that feels almost impossible.
yeah.
The other thing that I was thinking while you were saying all of that is how that relates to the recent news, that they're saying there is a, a rise in diagnosis, and so many women now are using ADHD meds, and people are screaming at conspiracy, or that, there is a trend, or the
Mm,
fact that they say, oh, but people see things on TikTok and they self diagnose and then they waste time. And that's why we have waiting lists that are so long. The reality is, no, we've been overlooked for years. And
mm,
that has a massive toll on our lives.
yeah,
And
definitely.
they're
Yeah,
just starting to making things right. We haven't
yeah,
seen the tip of the iceberg yet.
yeah, yeah,
So
definitely.
thank you for sharing it, because it's important, I think, to share these stories and to make people see, first of all, that they're not alone, but also like to put things into context. Because when you hear those stories about how ADHD is overdiagnosed, well, it's not really. It's just catching up.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I remember I can picture myself now just gazing out the windows in class. So I wasn't, although sometimes some of my reports did say that I was interrupting other kids, but I was also that daydreamer and, yeah, sitting there not listening. So, Yeah.
And, you said about your impulsivity and like recklessness, you said as well when you were a
Mm,
child.
yeah.
How that moved on, in your life? How did you experience that growing up? And how do you understand and frame that part of yourself now compared to how you've seen it
Yeah.
before?
I mean, I did get myself into some awkward situations, I think, especially in my 20s. I remember, remember, can laugh about it now, but at the time I thought that really was really stupid. But I got chatting to two men in a pub that had like a late license and music and stuff. Got chatting to them and they asked me if I wanted a lift home. And a lift. I can't remember where they said, but I just went with them. And afterwards I thought I was with them and their flatmate had some Southern Comfort, which I've never ever had since. And I was in the other side of London, which luckily I knew because I used to live near there. And then I had to get home the next day. And I was thinking, what was I even thinking going home? Even getting in a car with two men that I don't even know. But I think more recently it's been kind of overspending money, definitely. And it's almost like it's that thing about wants and needs. And I think it's really hard to differentiate because there are things I think, well, I need that. But do I really? Do I need another book? Probably not. So that is my weakness, buying books. But yeah, so I find it very easy to think, "Oh, no, but I really need that," when probably, actually, I just want it. So that has been a big thing for me, kind of overspend. I think I'm always looking for answers for things, understandably. So then I think, oh yeah, I'll get a book or I'll pay for a course or and even when I did my training to be an ADHD life coach, I think that was another fear. Would this just be the latest thing that I'm spending money on? And I gave it a lot of thought and I talked to my husband about it. And even when I started it, I was still unsure whether will I actually see this all the way through? And I was so proud of myself when I did. But yeah, just and I think that's another ADHD trait, starting things and not seeing them through. And so and I remember because I'm trying to do something at the moment and I think I'm a bit stuck on the first bit, which reminds me of when I was doing the last assignment for my final module where I got really stuck at the beginning. And my coach said, "Why are you trying to do it this way? You know it doesn't work for you." And I have been thinking the last day or two, maybe I need to do something else and go back to that bit. So I will have a think about that later because it feels like this bit is important and everything else kind of stems from it. But I'll have more of a think later and decide if there is another way around it. So we'll just break it into really tiny chunks, which I forget to do as well, even though I know it helps. This is the thing, isn't it? Remembering what helps us instead of beating ourselves up for doing things in a way that doesn't work.
Yeah. And it's building a system all over again. Like while neurotypical might have found their method, at school, we
Mm,
didn't have that. Most of us
no.
didn't have that. It was interesting when I got my diagnosis and assessor, like the psychiatrist was there. She was asking me questions about when I was a child. And I told her, oh yeah, for example, I was procrastinating, but then I always woke up at 5 in the morning. So nobody noticed because I would wake up at 5 in the morning to complete the homework before going to school. So, nobody ever noticed that I was procrastinating. She was like, that is not normal for a 7-year-old to do that. You basically, yeah, I was basically already creating my scaffolding system. And for me, that was what everybody else would do. For me, was normal in a way. And she was like, well, no, no, that is why you're constantly tired. That is why you're you're struggling that much, like even making a small decision after, because there is all of that you have to maintain that others don't have to. And it's interesting trying to see yourself and learn things about yourself when you're an adult, and people assume that you should have it all figured out while you're navigating this new diagnosis and you're relearning what it means to be you. So
Mm.
I guess what I wanted to ask you is, how did it feel for you? When you've got your diagnosis, what did you feel, and how has that journey been for you so far?
Yeah, it's been, yeah. I remember when I first got my diagnosis, I mean, I cried in the in the session. And the psychiatrist was so lovely, but I remember saying to my husband beforehand, I hope that they do say that I've got ADHD because it explains everything. And he was like, why do you want there to be something wrong with you? And I said, but otherwise I really am lazy and I'm not trying hard enough. So I think it was great to have that reassurance that there was a reason and it wasn't because I was lazy or not trying hard enough. But then I think as well, there was the frustration and how much easier things would have been. And I remember kind of going back to even like when I was 5, I wanted to be a doctor. And just thinking back, like maybe I would have been a doctor if I hadn't had ADHD. And I know there's people with ADHD who are doctors, but maybe if I'd had the right encouragement, having ADHD, maybe I could have still got there. But yeah, I think things would have been very different. I've had 2 failed marriages. Employment record hasn't been the best. Although it's improved kind of in my 30s, 40s and 50s. But yeah, just so many things were just impacted by having ADHD. And I suppose there's that frustration, like I said before, why didn't anybody realize? They were just, even if they didn't know about ADHD, surely you'd think something would have popped up and thought, there's something going on here. And I remember reading somewhere, which had never twigged with me, that kids with ADHD, they'll do really well in classes that they really enjoy and really bad in subjects that they hated. And I did history. It's like back then it was either O levels or CSEs. And I did a CSE in history and I really enjoyed it. So I ended up going ahead of the class and it was just like working through workbooks and my teacher just let me go ahead and work through these workbooks. But then in maths, I was getting like 30 odd % in my exams. So there was a difference, but I didn't really twig at the time. But yeah, it
Yeah,
was,
I had the exact same. Like for me, math was one of the things that I had my teacher saying, "Oh, she's very smart. If only she would focus more. If only she would apply herself more to what she's doing," or like things like that. But then I had other subjects like philosophy or literature where I was having like these fantastic grades because that would stimulate my imagination. And for me, was I felt like I was naturally inclined. I never thought that there was something else behind it. One of the things that I wanted to ask, because you mentioned also you had 2 failed marriages. Reflecting on ADHD, and you've also said that it might have been because you're adopted.
mm.
Um, how that shaped your relationship? Like specifically, what do you think like about being adopted might have had an effect on your relationships? And what could have been due to the ADHD?
I think this is where I think maybe they overlap a bit. And it's hard to separate them. But I think partly there was that need to be loved, which I think came from being abandoned. But then when you think about the ADHD and having loads of criticism by the age of 12, then, there's the potential to become people pleasers, having really bad boundaries and things like that. So I think all of that kind of played a part. And I remember with my first husband, I was 24 when we got married and he was older than me. And I thought, this is as good as it's going to get. No one else will ever love me. And I really did settle for, yeah, not very much, to be honest. And then my second marriage was really trying to get away from that situation, really. It was almost like I felt the need to be with somebody and I didn't have the strength at the time to be on my own. So it was like, if I'm with someone else, then I won't go back. So it was a bit impulsive, well, very impulsive. We got married as soon as my divorce was finalised. And I realised with hindsight that I didn't actually like him as a person. So, and this was someone that I thought I could spend the rest of my life with, and I didn't even like him. We had very little in common. So, yeah, it was a bit like, what the hell have I done? So, yeah, but I think it's harder to get out of a second marriage because it's like, well, everyone's allowed one mistake, but 2, that's a bit. So, I probably stayed longer than I would have done. So,
And again, it was because of the guilt, the shame,
Yeah, I
relate.
think so. And maybe you want everyone on the outside to think everything's okay apart from like, really close friends, but keeping that pretense up almost that everything's okay. And I know with my first husband, who is an alcoholic, although now he's been in recovery for decades, he would act in such strange ways. And I would think, is it me that's thinking that this isn't right? And I would ask my friends, like, is this behavior acceptable? Am I overreacting? And I think that was kind of my boundaries where they were so weak that I wasn't sure where I could reasonably kind of think, actually, no, that behavior isn't appropriate. I'm not taking that. So,
I relate a lot with what you just shared. I had a lot of relationships where I thought this is as good as it gets because I am unlovable. And again, it's because of all that shame and guilt that you carry with yourself, and it shapes you.
mm,
And then you get attached like it's a lifeline. That shred of love that you see feels like it's all you need to breathe. It's very sad when you then analyze those things, and in hindsight you think, I've allowed things that I shouldn't have. I should have had more self-love and self-respect. But kind of similar to you, like I feel we're now in relationships and in marriages that feel completely different to that.
mm,
How does that feel for you? What differences did you notice in that relationship that helped you and nurtured you?
yeah, I think one thing that really helped was that we met abroad and we lived 250 miles apart. So we were long distance for nearly 3 years. So it wasn't possible for us to rush into anything. We got to know each other really well. And I must admit, initially, I thought, well, it'll fizzle out because, he's got kids, although they're adults now. But, he'd see his kids every other weekend. So we'd meet, he'd come to me or I'd come up to see him. Alternate weekends, we'd go on holidays together and stuff. And I thought, it's a long way to go to spend a weekend with someone. We'll get one of us or both of us will get bored in a few months and it'll fizzle out. And it didn't. But I think having that and not being able to get really carried away really helped. So, yeah, I think that made a big difference. And we talked a lot because we'd be, texting every day, speaking on the phone almost every day. So yeah, so I think that gave us a good basis.
And we talked about your personal relationships, but how about your friendships? Because you said that growing up you struggled with friendships. How it is
Yeah.
now, and has your diagnosis changed anything?
I would say because I actually moved 250 miles to be with my husband. So a lot of my friends are still in London. So I don't see them as often as I'd like to. Although I think it was a bit of a test on both sides, I think, to think actually who do I want to still see when it's going to be more of an expense to meet up with people. So I think there was a bit of a natural cull almost of, who I wanted to remain friends with kind of thing. And I've made a few friends up here, but not as many as I would have liked to. But I've noticed that a lot of the friends that I do have got ADHD as well or suspect that they have ADHD. So it is that thing that we kind of attract each other. Um, which has been really nice. And there's that understanding where you kind of you almost don't need to explain it because the other person just understands. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, not all of my friends. I do have some friends who are neurotypical, but one of whom said, "Surely we're all a bit like that," and I thought, no. You're the least person like that at all. So, but yeah, it's frustrating. Someone's always going to say that, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah, but a lot of them are, and I've made an effort to get to know other people with ADHD as well over the last 3 years or so. So, which has been really nice. But yeah, a couple of my longer term friends have ADHD or strongly suspect they do. So, yeah, it's nice to have that connect.
You found your tribe, basically.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And it's so nice to be able to do that.
And you said that you had ADHD coaching after your
Mm,
diagnosis, and
yeah.
that it had like a big impact on
Mm.
you.
Yeah.
What was it that it was offered to you during those coaching sessions that helped in a way that other things hadn't?
think I think the understanding, the kind of being educated about how my brain was working, about I remember talking to her about I can't even remember what I was talking to her about, but I said, I want to be able to do this way. And she said, why? And I said, because that's how other people do it. And she went, you can't do it that way. And it was just so kind of valuable. And obviously it stuck with me for 3 years or whatever to actually, yeah, I can't put that pressure on myself to do things in a certain way because that's how other people think I should do things. I mean, I remember getting in an argument with my ex-husband because we'd agreed it was Christmas Eve, we'd agreed that we'd tidy the flat and he didn't like the way I was doing it. I mean, he had his own issues as well, obviously, but and maybe I don't do things in a very logical order, but I still get there in the end. And yeah, so what does it matter if I don't do it the way you think I should do it? So, but at the time, I didn't have the language to say that.
And what is the thing that it is the most valuable to you that you've learned about yourself?
I think not to compare myself to others.
Mm.
I think that's been, funnily enough, hitting 40 wasn't as bad as hitting 35. And there's
Yes.
someone when I went to school with is an actress. And I see her kind of not in massive parts, but every so often I see her and it's one of them. I know her and it's not that I recognize her and then I remember who it is. So I'm kind of, I was kind of comparing myself to people like her and, people who've had like really successful jobs and, earned loads of money and all the rest of it. And now I don't do that because I know that there's no benefit to it's not it's like comparing apples and oranges. Like they're not the same as me. So why would I compare myself to them? So yeah. So I think that's a big thing that I just don't go there now.
And it's interesting because when you grow up, it's kind of like the system tends to mold you right into what you're supposed to be, and that we're all supposed to be in a certain way. The career needs to be linear, your progression needs to be linear. You have to go from A to B to C to D. And because of how our brain works, that already feels
Mm.
like gonna do that. It's the
Yeah.
first thing. It's like, yeah, it's interesting how difficult it is, even just to accept something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, my parents expected me to, do a degree at 18 and, be a doctor or a lawyer and marry a doctor or a lawyer and have kids and have this all laid out life. And yeah, things didn't go quite like that. So, and then I kind of felt like a disappointment, which is horrible. You don't want to feel like you've let your parents down. But yeah, I definitely felt like I had. And my adoptive mum was an educational psychologist and bearing in mind, if she was still alive now, she'd be 104 this year. So she was older, but she didn't even believe in dyslexia. So the thought of someone actually saying to her, I mean, she worked with people who thought they were dyslexic, but I don't know what she thought it was, but she still worked with them and she helped them. But the thought of someone saying to her, actually, there's a reason for this. This would be
Yeah.
beneficial to your daughter. I think she'd have laughed in their faces and said, no, we know what's best. And they'd have carried on kind of, being really strict and controlling and pushy,
Yeah.
like doing everything that was counterproductive. So, yeah. And I think other kids with ADHD, even without that understanding, I think they probably, hopefully, got more support.
Yeah.
Hopefully. I think my parents were quite extreme, to be fair.
I think there is an element of culture that has evolved since like years ago. And we know that even the diagnostic system has evolved, like the understanding of it, like we know that we don't understand it fully yet. So there is a lot that has changed, and I think it's good to see the change. In a way, it's good to be part of this change, because
Yeah.
even us going through the diagnosis, and it helps because it's data, and with more data science can evolve. It's sad to think about what we've missed out in a way, because the support wasn't available. But I'm glad to see that things are slowly changing now. Like
Yeah.
I see kids in school now when they have the support that they need and everybody can thrive at their own pace. It's not perfect yet, but at least it's a start, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And I'm interested because you talked about how that coaching helped you. So, at what point did you realize that you just didn't want the support, but you wanted to be that support for others?
Yeah, I'm not yeah. I think it was just so helpful and so useful to be able to understand how my brain worked and
Hmm.
to kind of understand that like no two people with ADHD are the same, but there are obviously overlapping issues. And just to be able to help people who need that support to kind of learn how to be kinder to themselves, learn how to do things that help them. I was talking to a friend who was saying that he was being told something, I think, at work, and he couldn't understand it. So then he had to kind of work it out in a way that he could understand it and then learn it himself. And I said, so that's almost like you being told something in a foreign language, having to translate it into English and then making sense of it. But he was thinking he was the problem. But it's the way that he was being told the information. So even, when I did my training, there were, and I'm guessing it was similar for you, kind of different teaching styles because we all have different ways of taking in information. So I'm very visual and I have stuff in front of me, so if I can't see it, I forget it. So I know now, it's almost like I would kind of, like if you need a code for something, I'd think, oh yeah,
Mm.
I need to remember that. And now I think, right, I'll write that down. It's almost like it was just another opportunity to beat myself up. Like, you can't remember something for like 30 seconds, and now I think I know I can't remember it, I'll write it down. That's not an issue. But it's almost that thing of, finding things that work for us and not blaming ourselves for things we struggle with.
Yeah. And you're right. It's absolutely the same thing. Like for me, I've been a coach for work, like for many years. And the moment that I realized that I wanted, when I had my diagnosis and I wanted to bring this to others, I want to be that support for others so that they wouldn't struggle. I had to rethink the way coaching works in a neurotypical way because, the first thing that you say is clarity. Clarity needs to be at the center of it all. But for me, when I think about our mind, it's like, well, that doesn't work for us because there is a lot that goes on in our head. So that's why I redesigned my own coaching model when I was like, okay, so we need the regulation first. Otherwise it's not going to work. But
Mm,
yeah, it's it's very interesting to see with all the people that I spoke to, and many of the people that I spoke to have been diagnosed late. I don't want to give an exact number just because I haven't done my analysis and I'm a scientist at my core, but I will say the majority of them have expressed this thing about wanting to help others and wanting to be there for others in one capacity or another, right? And to me, it's striking. And I don't know if it's because we feel things deeply.
mm,
Um, we see things like more broadly. So for us, somebody that needs help is not just about there and then; it's about their entire being. I don't know. But I find it really interesting to see how there is this common theme with everybody that I spoke to. It's really really good. One, we arrived at the point where I usually ask the signature questions of the
mm,
podcast, and the first one is, what are the traits that you love about yourself and what are
mm.
the traits that you really really struggle with?
I like the fact that I have lots of ideas, some of which have to be good ideas because I have so many of them. I like being able to see things maybe in a different way to other
Hmm.
people or kind of make connections with things that maybe other people don't. In some ways, I quite like my impulsivity because I think it makes me a more fun person. It's just when I'm spending loads of money that it's not so good. But yeah, some of it's okay. But I think what I really struggle with is not being able to focus, procrastination,
Mm.
and yeah, that's something that I'm still working on. So I love being busy, but I think when it's down to me to choose what to do while setting up my own business, it's like it's almost like I need someone else to say, right, this is what you need to do today. But yeah, it's a learning curve.
And do you have any like funny stories about your impulsivity and money spending that you would like people to hear about?
Well, I mean, even this weekend, because I've been trying to understand more about, because obviously there's a correlation between adoptees and ADHD. So I'm curious what it is. And some people think, and the therapist I had when I first got my ADHD diagnosis was
Hmm.
convinced that actually, well, I'm not saying she didn't think I had ADHD, but her focus was more on trauma. And obviously, I did experience trauma as a child, and some of that trauma was being adopted. So
Mm.
I'm trying to get clearer in my head when is ADHD, and when is it actually trauma and not ADHD, if that makes sense. So I thought, oh, I'm going
Yeah.
to find some books that I can read and some courses. And one of the courses that I downloaded, the person giving the class, recorded class, said he started talking about people getting ADHD in adulthood, and I thought, no, I can't listen to this. So I kind of asked for my money back, and then I paid for a different course, which was actually more on childhood trauma, which I thought would be more fitting. But the number of books
Mm.
that I've ordered this weekend and, courses just to get my head around this. But in a way, that's what I did when I was doing my degree. Even if I found like a really simple book on something that would just say, right, this. So I kind of want a really clear information on what parts of the brain are affected when you experience childhood trauma compared to the parts affected when you have ADHD. Because I'm sure there's an overlap, but
Mm.
there are also differences. And that's the bit I think I'm interested in. And that's also the bit I'm stuck with. And it feels like quite a big task. But when I put it like that, actually, it is very specific. It's just finding that information. So, but yeah, so I will, that's my plan for today, to get an answer I'm happy with.
I like the fact that I keep saying to people, like, this is the last question. And then I find another one in my head. But that is so ADHD of me that I think it explains a lot already. But the other signature question that I wanted to ask you is, how do you feel about chit chats?
I'm not too bad with chit chats compared to some people I know. But I absolutely love it when you have a conversation with someone and it gets deeper. And I feel like I've really made a connection with that person. But
Mm.
I could sit in a taxi and chat to the driver about the weather or if he's been busy. It really doesn't bother me. But yeah, I love it when you make that connection with someone and it's meaningful.
I'll probably make a statistics out of it when I finish this podcast with all the people that I spoke to, because you're the second person that tells me that, they're not dreading it, that they're fine with it. They can do that. So
Mm,
it's interesting to see.
yeah.
I promise this is the last question.
Okay.
So, if someone is listening and they
Mm.
have just been diagnosed and they are at a later stage of their life and they're having these confusion, grief, self-doubt, all of it, what would you want to say to them?
Accept that those ups and downs are going to happen. Speak to someone if you can, like not even necessarily coaching, therapy. I think they recommend CBT, don't they, for ADHD. Reach out to friends and family that you can trust to be supportive, because obviously not everyone is. Ask questions, like join groups like Facebook groups. There's, some really supportive Facebook groups for people with ADHD. Just reach out and ask those questions and get the support that you need.
Thank you, Petra. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. And thank you so much for everything that you've shared. I know that, people will find this very useful. And I love that we're creating like a community of people. And when they people listening can feel heard and seen. So thank you.
Thank you.
Suspicious Brain podcast will come back soon with a new episode and new stories to share. So stay tuned and follow me now, before you forget.